Slideshow with crossfade effect, JavaScript with CSS animation. For this version of the slideshow, we're going to do something very similar to what we did before, but with a little bit of a twist. It's going to be a little bit more sophisticated. And I've got a little styling in here to make the slideshow look a little bit better. But instead of just swapping out the source, we'll have a crossfade effect as we go from one slide to the next. And we'll be using CSS to do that animation. So it's going to be a little bit different than what we did before, but very similar otherwise. The HTML for this slide deck, for this slideshow, is very similar to what we had before. We just have images, but now I have a folder called slides. So image source slide, image 1, and then I've got an alt tag and the ID for the image here, and then I've got my next and previous links as I had before. And you can see that over here in my HTML. So very simple setup with an image inside of a div called content. One thing that's different is that this time I'm using CSS to tell that content to be position relative. And I'm absolutely positioning these slides inside of here. So this content is set to 400 by 266 pixels, which is the exact size of the images that I have. And over here, you can see it here on the page. Now, if I were to go into my CSS over here and adjust that, you'd see a little bit better exactly what's going on here. So if I made this 500 wide instead of 400 wide, and 366 instead of 266, and save that, you'd see over here when I refresh this that the image is pinned to this upper left-hand corner, and before it was the same size as the box that it was in. Whereas now I've made the box bigger, so you get this empty space up here, but the image is pinned up into the corner. And it's important to understand that because the way this slideshow is going to work is we're going to put a new image right on top of the old image. And then we're going to put it in fully transparent, and then we'll fade it in so that you'll get that crossfade effect. But you can see the image here is position absolute, left 0, top 0. So that's what's putting that image inside this parent element, this container, at the top left corner, left 0, top 0. And that's what's going on there. So we can put these back because that's just for demo. And you'll see if I refresh this that the image is now once again fitting inside that box perfectly. So it's important to understand that setup before we start with this. The next thing we need is the actual CSS animation that's going to actually do the crossfade effect. So we need to add this to the style sheet. So go back to Visual Studio Code, and on the styles down here at the bottom, we can add these animation styles. So I'm going to add a class called fade in img, fade in image. And what is that class going to do? It's going to come over here and see here. We're going to run an animation called fade in over 2 seconds. 2 seconds is kind of slow. You could make it 1 second. You can make it even slower. I'm making it kind of slow so you can really see it. See it taking effect as we do this. But you could make it run a little bit faster. Animation. And then we want to do fade in over 2 seconds. And that's fine. And then down here, we're going to have a function that will allow us to fade it in, an at keyframes function called fade in. So these two names have to match. So we'll add at keyframes fade in And then we're going to go from opacity 0. So we'll do, oh, I forgot from opacity 0 to opacity 1. So it's a very simple animation. You can make much more complex animations using this. Fade in from opacity 0 to opacity 1. Okay, great. Make sure you save this file. It's got the dot up here, so make sure you save the file so you've saved that. And make sure you have this in here correctly, because we're going, when we add an image on top of the other one, we're going to add this class to it. And then this class is going to run this fade in at keyframes fade in here, which will start at 0 and then go to 1. So it'll come in at completely transparent and then fade into 1, which is completely opaque, over 2 seconds. And that's what's going to actually create that crossfade effect. So none of this is being done in JavaScript itself. And that's actually great, because you can do this kind of thing in JavaScript, but it's much more efficient to do it in CSS. If you do it in CSS, then you can take advantage, the browser will take advantage of the GPU, the graphics processing unit of whatever computer or device you're using. Whereas if you do it in plain JavaScript, it's just the normal CPU, and the GPU is really optimized to handle this kind of thing. So it'll be nice and smooth and work much better if we can do the actual animation in CSS. And we're frequently going to do that with JavaScript, where we use JavaScript to trigger CSS animations. And although we can do the animations directly in JavaScript, whenever we can use it to trigger CSS animations, it's better for performance across all kinds of devices. Now we're all set up and ready to go and ready to start writing our script. And our script is going to start with just a basic variable, again, for our current image, and our array, same array that we had before, same current image variables. And then I've got variables for the container, which is going to go get that container that's holding our image, and then for the next and previous buttons as well. So let's go ahead and get these set up in our script. So going back to our index file here, I'm just going to add script tags at the bottom of our script here, our HTML script, like so. And then I'm going to add var current image, and I'm going to set that to a value of 0 initially. And then I'm going to have var I want to make sure I match the same name that I have over here. I call it my photos. This time I used a lowercase p, so make sure you watch out for that. If you want to make it match my slides, my photos equals, doesn't matter if it's a lowercase p or an uppercase p, but you want to make it match. And as before, we're going to have our array, image1.jpg, comma, space, and then I'm just going to copy this. And again, it doesn't matter if you use single quotes or double quotes. Probably best if you're consistent, but it doesn't really matter. 3, 4, and 5. And remember, for the last one, you don't have a comma. So you want to get rid of that comma, but add a semicolon after this array here. A lot of times when students are typing these at first, they forget that each one of these needs to be inside a set of quotes. So make sure that you've got each one of these inside a set of quotes, followed by a comma. You can't just add a quote here and a quote at the end and then put them all in there with commas. You have to have each one is inside of a set of quotes. Okay, so we've got that. And then the next thing we need are to get some variables, var container equals document dot get element by ID. And the ID that we're getting, again, is this one, content. And it's always good to copy and paste so that you don't spell that wrong. So that's going to get us that element. We also need the next and previous links, var next btn equals document dot get element by ID. Next, var prev btn equals document dot get element by ID. Previous. So again, that's going to go into our document. We're going to get our next button, we're going to get our previous button, and we're going to get our content div that we're going to be putting into these elements here. And I have an extra space there that I shouldn't have. Make sure you fix that if you have that in there. Okay, document get element by ID, content, next, and previous. Great, so we've got all of that. In the next video, we'll add the event listener for when you click on this next link here to go to the next slide. And just like we did before, we'll build out the next one, and then when we're done with that one and we get that all working, we'll work on the previous one. So we'll go ahead and work on that one first. Okay, here's our event listener for when we click on the next button. And for this one, we're using the add event listener method instead of the on-click property. So we'll look at this method and we're going to add the event listener right to that next button variable that we created. And when it's clicked, we're going to run a function. This is an anonymous inline function. And we're going to pass in the event object so that we can prevent the default behavior of what happens when you click the link. So we don't want the browser to handle clicking the links the way it normally would. We want to prevent that default behavior. And prevent default will do that when we pass in this event object here. So we'll prevent default. And then just like before, we're going to increment the current image, and then we're going to check once again if the current image happens to be greater than the length of the array that we've got, -1. So again, this could be a 4 here, but instead of a 4, we're putting myphotos.length -1. If that's true, we're going to set current image back to 0. So that part's exactly the same as we did before. And really this part is only different because we're using the event listener instead. So let's go ahead and put this in. So I have my next button here, which is already going and getting that element. So now I can just do next btn.add event listener, and I'm listening for a click. That's what I'm listening for. And when the click happens, I'm going to run a function. And I'm going to pass into that function the event object. I'm going to put a semicolon at the end of this line. So this function is going to run when the click happens. And then I'm going to click inside here and I'm going to add something like event.prevent default. So that'll prevent the default behavior so that when I click on this link, I don't actually get the hashtag coming up in the browser. And that's kind of nice to not have that show up. So it just prevents sort of even trying to go to this href at all. And that's great. And then what we're going to do is we're going to increment current image plus, same as we did before. And just like we did before, if current image is greater than my photos dot length minus 1. So really a 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. If it's greater than 4, my photo's length would be 5. But I want to check to see if it's greater than 4. Because if it's greater than 4, then what I want to do is I want to move it back to current image equals 0. So I will put it back to where it was initially. And again, you could put this on a separate line here. I kind of like it organized this way because that's all just on one line there. There we go. So now current image is going to increment and it's going to go up and it's going to become either, it's going to go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and then back to 0. Here's the new part. Instead of just swapping the source attribute, which is what we did in the first slideshow, in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new image element. Document create element img. So that makes a new image tag. I'm going to put it into this variable called new slide. And then I'm going to set the source, new slide src, to slides / my photos current image. Notice the use of the tick marks here. And the $ curly brace is going to hold the variable for the my photos thing. Okay, so that's going to go get the next photo from the slides folder. And then I'm going to also add a class name, fade in image. And you'll remember we just added that class to the CSS. So we know what that does. When we add that class, it runs that animation over 2 seconds of actually fading in the image. And then we append the child to the slide. So the new slide gets appended to the container. It gets appended with this source and this class. As soon as it gets appended to the container, that animation runs and changes the opacity from 0. It starts at 0 and it goes to 1, which means it's going to go from completely transparent to completely opaque. And because we're adding it into this container, and the CSS for that container is to make these images position absolute, it's going to get put right on top of the previous image. And because it's the same size as the previous image, it will completely cover it. But because it comes in as transparent, you'll see the other image underneath it at first, and then over 2 seconds, it'll become opaque. And that's where it will cause the fade-in effect. So let's go ahead and add this to our code over here. Var new slide. And I'm going to set that to document dot create element. And what am I going to create? I'm going to create an image, img. So there we go. So now we've got a variable that's holding a new image element. The image element is not on the page, but it's there. And then I'm going to say new slide dot class name equals fade in img. Make sure you spell it right. This needs to match exactly what you have here, fade in image. Those two things need to match. Doesn't matter if you spelled it differently from how I did, as long as this one matches, as long as they're the same as each other, and then that's fine. So we're going to add that on there. Oh, I also forgot. I'm going to do new slide dot src. I'm going to set its source to, I'm going to use my tick marks here, tick, tick. And in here, I'm going to say, okay, slides, because I'm in a folder called slides over here. I need to go to slides, and then I need to do slash and I would put image 1 or image 2 or image 3, but instead I'm going to put a variable there. So again, we do the $sign and the curly braces so we can do a variable. And what variable do we want? We want my photos, square brackets, current image. That current image right there. Current image. So when we click the next button the first time, it starts off at 0. When we click it the first time, it gets incremented to 1. So when that gets incremented to 1, a new photo gets created, and the source gets set to, this gets incremented to 1, so the source gets set to image 2, and that goes in there. So it's // that'll be an image2.jpg the first time you click it. The next time you click it, it'll be an image 3. And when you get to image 5, if you click it again, that gets beyond the length here, so it gets set back to 0, so it'll go back to 1. Now the last thing we need to do here is append this to the container. And we created a variable here for the container. So we can say container.append child new slide. So it'll take that new slide that we created here as an image, set the source, set the class, and put it on in there. Put it on the page. Let's save this and see if I did it right. I'm going to go over to my slideshow here, click refresh, and then click next. And look at that, it's working. It's working just perfectly. Next, and I can see in here that it's adding the images one on top of the other. It put 3 on top of 2. It put 4 on top of 3. It put 5 on top of 4. And now it'll put 1 on top of 5. And you'll see as you're adding them, that animation is taking place. And over 2 seconds, the picture comes in as transparent. And then over 2 seconds, it fades to opaque. And that's what's creating that crossfade effect. As you just saw, this is working. And the images are coming in and they're stacking one on top of the other and fading in. But there's one thing that we can do to make this a little bit better. I don't really like that every time I click the link, it's adding more images to the DOM, especially when it starts adding the same images to the DOM over and over and over again. I think that it could be a little bit more efficient and a little bit better and a little bit cleaner. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the extra ones, the extra images as the new images come in. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, container, you have children. The children of the container are the images. And if I have more than 2 images, if children.length is greater than 2, I'm going to remove the first one in that container, the bottom image. I'm going to remove the one from the very bottom of that list, which is not showing anyway. It's at the bottom of the stack and it's not going to be seen anyway. So that means you'll have one image and then you'll put another image on top. And as soon as you click next and add a third image, then the one at the very bottom of the list will go away so that you never have more than 2 in the list. And I think that that makes the script a little bit better, keeps our DOM a little bit cleaner because we're not continuing to add more and more elements every time somebody clicks the link for next. So let's go ahead and add this to our script over here. So down here, I'm going to say if, and in here I'm going to just put container dot children dot length. If that's greater than 2, then I want to do something. And what do I want to do if it's greater than 2? What I want to do is I want to say container dot remove child. I want to remove a child. Which child do I want to remove? I want to do container.children. That'll be all of them, but I want to get square bracket 0. That will remove the bottommost child from the list. And we're using the remove child method, which is a document method that allows us to go into the document and remove a child from a particular element, in this case, the container. And again, up here, the container is this thing, this div, and it has children, which are images. And this, when we start off the page, there's just one, but as we've been clicking the link, it adds more and more and more and more in there. And we really don't want that to happen. So this will keep us from adding more than 2, because once we get more than 2, it'll remove the bottom one from the list. Let's save this and see if I typed it all right and test it over here. And I'm going to look at my content here. You can see I've got one image there. I add one. So that adds image number 2 on there. And then now if I click it again, whoops, image number 3, what did I do wrong over here? And this happens. You'll notice over here I've got errors. So what did I do wrong? Let's go to the console and see. Oh, container is not defined. So this is a perfect example of a type of error that might come up, will probably come up if you spell something wrong. And it says over here on line 39, container. Line 39, container. Container. There we go. Let's try that. Come back here. We all make misspellings. We all make mistakes. Don't expect to not make mistakes. It's great when those come up while I'm doing this, because then you get to see how I fix it. All right, so coming in here, I can click next, and it's adding that on there. You'll notice I'm not getting the error now. And now when I click the third one, it should add the third image, but also remove the first one at the bottom there, or really at the top of this list. But really this one is underneath that one. So that's what I mean by bottom. So now we've added image 3, but image 1 went away. And I can keep going. And I'll do image 4 on top of there. And then image 5, we've got 4 and 5 on the screen. 4 is on the bottom, 5 is on the top. And image 1 is now on the top. You might be wondering why the one down here at the bottom is on the top. You have to remember the page renders from the top to the bottom. And the fact that these are set to position absolute means that this one gets added to the page first, and then this one gets added to the page second. And because it gets added to the page second, and because of the absolute positioning, that means it ends up on top. It's on top of the first image. So that's working just great. Exactly what we want. We have our next button working just fine. So I can click next and it will go through the slides. And not only that, but it's kind of nice and clean because it removes any extra slides we don't need as it's adding new slides on top. So that's really neat and that's working. So now the question is, how do we get the previous button to work? Because currently clicking that does nothing but reset the page, and notice we're getting the hashtag up here. So how do we get the previous button to work? What we want to do is pretty much the same thing that we did with the next button, but with the previous button. See if you can do that challenge on your own. And you can even go ahead and take this function that we've written for the next button here, this one here, copy and paste it, and see what you need to change to make it work for the previous button. And just like before, you can use, you can actually use the previous slideshow, the previous project, the earlier version of the slideshow, to figure out how to do this, because we're going to decrement the image and this is going to change. But all of this is going to remain exactly the same. So see if you can do it on your own. Pause this video and come back when you've tried it and either you've gotten it to work or you haven't gotten it to work. Now, even if you don't get it to work, that's okay. Try to do it on your own. Did you get something like this? Hopefully you did. Let's take a look at what's changed here. What's changed is here we're putting the event listener on the previous button instead of the next button. So that's different. The rest of this is all the same. Instead of incrementing current image, we're decrementing it. So that's different. And then down here, the if statement has changed a little bit. If the current image is less than 0, we're setting current image to photos length -1, just like we did in the previous slideshow. So other than that, everything else is the same. So let's see if we can actually make this work. Over here, I'm going to copy this script and then paste it here and just change this to prev btn, which is what I have up here, prev btn. So that's going to go into the DOM and get that button and add the event listener to it, and all this stuff is the same. The only thing that's different is here. This gets decremented. And then down here, if this is less than 0, then we're going to set current image to myphotos.length -1. Okay, so that's going to set that all up there to work for the current image for that one. And that should be it. That's all we need. The rest is going to be the same. We're still going to create an image. We're still going to go get the image from the array based on the value of current image here. And then we're still going to apply that class to it, and we're going to still put it on the page, and we're still going to remove the extra children. So all the rest should be the same. Let's see if this works. If we come back and click refresh, next works. I can add images, and over here you can see they're getting added. Image 2, image 3, I could add one more, image 4. And now when I click previous, you can see image 3 got put on top and image 4 is now on the bottom. Image 2 is now on top, image 3 is on the bottom. Image 1, and then image 5, because we're going to the end of the array. And then back on down through the array like that. So that's working perfectly, just exactly what we want. Your script is working great, and you could just leave it the way it is. It's totally fine. But you'll notice that we have a fair amount of duplicate code. If we go over and look at our script, we've got this chunk of code in here. That's a good, several lines of code, which is exactly the same as this chunk of code up here. And there's a concept in programming called don't repeat yourself, dry, don't repeat yourself. So what we want to do is, instead of repeat this code twice, pull it out and put it into a separate function. We're going to make a function called swap image, something like that. And that function is going to have this chunk of code in it. And then instead of having this chunk of code here in each of these event listeners, we can just run that function twice, once in the next button event listener function and one in the previous event listener button function. So try to do that on your own. See if you can pull that code out, put it in a separate function, and give that function a name, and then call that function here inside these functions. And see if you can do that on your own. Pause this video now and try it. And if you can't figure it out, or once you do figure it out, continue with the video to see if you got the same thing that I got. Did you get something like this? I hope you did. You may have named it something slightly different, and that's fine, but this is what I named it, swap image. And down here I have a swap image function. Let's do this together, just in case you got stuck, and you can see how I would go about doing this. So down here, I'm going to make a new function. Function swap image. And then that function is going to contain all of this stuff in here. So I can cut that and stick it inside this function. There we go. And now, instead of having that up there, I can just run swap image right here. I can also run it here in place of this stuff because it's all exactly the same. There we go. So now we've got a function called swap image that will run twice. It'll run the same function basically if you're clicking the next button or the previous button. And that kind of cleans up our code because we can see here very clearly that the next button is incrementing this variable and then checking with an if statement and then running a function. And we can come down here and we can see what that function does very easily without any fuss or muss. So that kind of really cleans up the code a bit. Let's test it and make sure we did it right. So over here, I'm going to refresh the page. If I click next, you can see that the script is working exactly the same as it did before. Nothing else has changed really. We're not adding any new functionality. We're just refactoring our code. You always want to refactor your code and try to make it better and try to reduce the amount of code or make it cleaner or make it easier to read. All of these things you want to do. And often when you're working on projects, you'll find ways, you'll look at an old piece of code and you go, oh, wow, I could have made that simpler. And you'll do that. And that's just part of the normal process for any programmer. Now, the very last thing to do here is to put it in a separate linked file and to do all of our nice cleanup stuff to follow best practices for scope and for everything else. So let's do that quickly together as well. So I'm going to come back to my file over here. I'm going to make a new file on here. Click new file here and call it script.js. And look at that. I've made a mistake because I can see it's putting it inside my slides folder, which is not where I want it. So you want to actually move that out here. Are you sure you want to move? Yes, move. So now it's here. So make sure it's not inside the slides folder. It's here, script.js. And you could put it inside the slides folder and link it there. It just doesn't really make a lot of logical sense to put it in there. Okay, so on the script file, once again, I'm going to add my immediately invoked function, parentheses, curly braces, and then an additional set of parentheses and a semicolon. It's terrible syntax, but that's what we do here. This function will run immediately when the page runs. And then click between the curly braces and move that down. And we're going to add use strict in here. So that's great. So we've got use strict in there. And now we can come over here to grab our script from here. We're just going to grab everything inside our script tags all the way up to the very top of the script tag here. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to stick it over here and paste it in there. And I'm going to actually Shift Tab to move it back. So now that's in there. That's good. Now the last thing I want to do is I want to go through and fix the variables here. This one, current image, is going to change. That variable is going to change down here. We can see that. So that needs to be let. But the rest of these can all be const, 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 because those aren't going to change during the script at all. during the running of the script. And then down in the swap image, we have a variable here. That one can also be const. Great, so we've got that. So now we've got our file all set, and that's all looking good. Over here on our index file, we just need to get rid of that stuff and put in here src equals script.js. That's our file. And we can put this up here like so. We could leave it like that, or even better, we could take this and move it up here into the head of the page and add the defer attribute here. Save that, and then always check to make sure you didn't mess things up along the way. And look at that, it's working perfectly. Everything works great. So there we go. We have finished our script and we've cleaned it all up. And in this lesson, you've learned a lot about some different ways of doing things and how to add elements to the page and remove them from the page, all with using our document object model as well as our event handlers. And this is a really great little slideshow that you could use on any web page. And yeah, I think this is a great project. Hello, and welcome to the fourth module of this course. Congratulations for making it this far. You've learned a lot of JavaScript so far, and this fourth module is going to really help you push your skills even further. In this module, we'll be doing a lot of practice. To learn JavaScript, you really have to practice. You have to get used to the syntax. You have to think about how to break problems down into smaller pieces to actually make something that works. And we'll be doing that in this fourth module. And by creating interactive elements and practicing what you've already learned, you'll be making some things that are interesting and fun, but also really learning JavaScript along the way. So let's get to it, and hopefully by the end of this module, you'll be really excited about what you've learned so far in this course, and you'll be excited to go on to the next course and learn even more about JavaScript.